he's seen was whatever happened before. So.
Yeah, I have a question on that. Iago, when he's leaving Rodrigo, and I already talked to Provencio, I don't, that whole...
when he's leaving, you mean at the
yeah,
end?
yeah, on page 8, just in the very beginning. Oh, actually.
Yeah.
Well, I must leave you. It's a wholesome my place here to be productive. He doesn't want to be caught by the morn. I do not know the state. However, this may gall him, for he's embarked in to the Cyprus Wars.
Yeah.
What is that in reference to?
That's what it is. What he's talking about. The wars are imminent. In other words,
the wars
are
imminent. So he's about. They know this is going to happen.
This is going to happen. Okay. It's just a matter of when. It may be a few hours. The thing is, to help that, in terms of that line, also in terms of the whole scene. Remember, I said about the given circumstances. Always make them urgent. If everything else is equal. Yeah. It could be that they expect to hear from the Senate in a week. On the other hand, it could be they expect to hear from them in an hour, 8 hours, a day, 2 days at the most. So they're just waiting for the word, and then he's off. He's gone. Promulgate means to promote.
Promulgate.
Yeah.
When I know that boasting is an honor, I shall promote it.
I shall promote it, exactly. That's Othello's line. Yeah, in other words, I will announce, when it becomes an honor to be pretentious and to talk about my background, well, then that's when I will do it. He's being sarcastic. He's about as sarcastic as he could ever get. Certainly not been sarcastic about it. This is scene 2. You are
say like Senator Stump or what?
Yeah, well, a matter of speaking, sure. It's a very good line because he says, "You are a villain." After that outrageous thing, and he comes back at him and says, "Well, you are a senator. That's the same thing. I'm no worse than you." In effect, that's what he said. And also on that line, what can be done? And again, it doesn't have to be. It's not carved in rock. But I want to give you some definite ideas about readings of lines. And then later on, when you do the show, a year from now or whenever, you'll come up with alternatives. That's not the point. But if you have an idea now, it'll open up the line to a great deal. He says to him, depending on how Brabantio does the line, this is what I'm talking about, but let's say it ends up where Brabantio says, he stops after what Iago says, it's so inflammatory, and he doesn't have, he's so flustered and so angry, he can't express his feeling. And finally it comes out, but very deliberately. It just happens to come out that way. And he says, "You are a villain!" Just like that. Now, Iago could take that in and look at him and say, "You are a senator!" See what I'm driving?
Just mock him.
Mock him. In other words, make the point, compound the point, and do it exactly the way he does.
Yeah.
See? Now, it could be done other ways, too. Yeah. Whatever struggle that he has with that line, Brabantio, whatever personal struggle he has, when he does it quickly, he's flustered, or he has a break, or there's a pause, Iago can mimic it perfectly. And then, found out this evening, Iago, that Othello is going to get married within the hour. He's been called that right this moment, she is being taken from her place, and she's coming here, we're going to get married, and he wants him to know because he's his number 1 man, number 2 man, and there's going to be a fallout, obviously. Now, he's furious because he wasn't trusted about this. He wasn't told anything about this. He had no inkling. And all of a sudden, he's going to get married. So, he's furious for his own pride, but also because of Rodrigo, because he may lose Rodrigo now. So what does he do? He goes to his residence, happens to find him in, and he tells him, "I have some news to you." He doesn't tell him what it is. And he wants to bring him to Brabantio's house, that area, because then he can also attack Brabantio and maybe create havoc, and in which case Brabantio maybe will annul the marriage or whatever. He has a kind of a plan. It's kind of it's not organized. It's just something just to get revenge. He's furious, and also the lieutenancy, which he did not get 3 days ago. He's furious about that. So all this has happened in the last couple of days, and now this thing we're talking about now has happened in the last few hours. So he brings him here. After they come here to within a block of Brabantio's home, then he tells him. And what he's got to do then is placate him. He's got to find the words. There's a few objectives here, but you have to find the main one. To placate him, to retain his goal, in effect, not to lose the money, the $8,000 or $6,000 which he's gotten from him in the last year, not the last year, the last 8 months. And then we can go after Devonshire. Now, Rodrigo will have none of this. As I said in the last class, he's going. So now they come in. We're not going to worry about blocking now. We're not going to do blocking, but I'll mention blocking to you in terms of things that we could do to give you ideas and that will help you in terms of the reading of the lines. Okay, you're going to have to mark the script. Whenever there's a break of any kind, whether it be an emotional break or just a slight break in the line, you should have an angled line. If it's a big break, 2 lines. I would write down the initial of whatever is happening there. If GC, to give a circumstance, right near where the line is. There's no sense in writing all this out. You don't have to. If it's a pause, use P for the pause, obviously. And you should have a permanent record. So when we're through, you will have a breakdown of the script from A to Z. Just about every line will be broken down in terms of what's happening on the line, where the breathing would be. Oh, another thing. When lines connect, when you have what we call run-on lines, where you have a line and then it goes right into the next one. Now, it doesn't have to go necessarily. There are some that do. There are some lines in Shakespeare that I feel definitely should be run-ons. You won't remember this, guarantee you. I would also underline key words. Words that you emphasize, or simply words that are important. Yes, factual. GC would be for background. That would be, otherwise we're going to have a mishmash of everything. Yeah. So always emotional. Insight, and remember, it's not always true. There are things that certain characters say which tell us things, and we know they're lying or whatever. I'm mentioning the more important ones now. D for discovery. So important. And even more important, firsts. F for firsts. When you have a first time that's ever happened in this character's life. Either the first time he's done this, he or she has done this, or the first time it's happened. You have a line, and within the line you have another thought. Either one that adds to the line, or like colors it a certain way. So you start with, let's say the first 5 words of the line deal with A. And the next 5 words are parenthetical, and the last 5 words also deal with A. So you see, we do this all the time. Right. Some people more than others. I know I do it constantly. It drives people crazy. Be aware of that. And as we go along, we'll mark them because there's a color there. And sometimes there are good alternatives. It's not carved in rock. The English would have us believe, not all of them, but a lot of them, the English directors, that you find out exactly what you're going to do technically. It can only be done one way, more or less, and then you memorize that, and then you do it. So you have opposing words or lines. Ram, white, black ram, white. Now we're going to get it. It's going to be very emotional, what we're doing, but also it's going to be technical. It's a combination of the two. And as we go along, questions, please. Anything else before we start?
Does Cassio pretend to know nothing about the will? We did touch it.
That's the next
relationship, period. Yeah, well, that's the next.
Right. Let's get to that. We will, soon when we hit that scene, we will. The other thing, very important, because now I'm not going to go into all of them I mentioned before, is preface, where you preface, very important. It colors the line that you want to say, obviously. And I would use that wherever you can, especially at the beginning of lines, beginning of speech. And in an area like what we have here, it's staccato. Anytime you have a scene like this, it's a rule. Unless, there's always an exception to the rule, unless the character perhaps is in a scene and they're excited, but they control the excitement. They're determined to control it. So perhaps, when you get to scenes like that, which are few and far between, it could be otherwise. 98% of the time, it's the way it is here. What you need here on those words, it's got to be should's, one syllable. Okay? And then as you go along, whenever you come to, in fact, in this whole scene, that will be the rule. Is it clear that opening line when he ends with should's know of this? Is it clear what he, in other words, let me see if I understand what you mean. In other words, he's saying, Rodrigo, that you must have known about this, and you didn't tell me. Yeah. Okay, that's fine. And that's what he's intimating, well, more than intimating, obviously. So in other words, you've had my curses at the strings, but I should know of this, but there's something after that then. There's something left unsaid, which it obviously means. In other words, what I'm driving at is, you've had my curses at the strings were thine, I take it much unkindly, and then you get that Alexander should know of this. That's really what he is saying. The part in between is the fact that it's outrageous, the more so because you've been taking money from me. What have I been giving you the money for? But to court her, but also to let me know what's going on in her life, you know. So what would come after should know of this? There's something, if there were words, obviously there are words, they're not said, but there are words to make it even more clear. You see what I'm trying to do? We're not doing blocking literally up here, but we will do the blocking motion. I'll give you some ideas, and hopefully it will help in terms of what's happening in the scene, and in terms of the reading of the line. I mentioned this last week, but we'll go back over it since we're going into detail now. Let's say that we choose to do it where Iago comes in first, and he's being followed by Rodrigo. It could be either way, or it could be the reverse. It does. But let's say we do it that way. The director chooses to do it that way. He comes in first, trying to get, he's on him. I can't talk to you, it's hopeless. And he's after him and after him. He says his blood, but you'll not hear it. And then he stops. In other words, we've argued about this for a few minutes. I can't get through to you, so to hell with it. So let's pull something interesting. So a reverse. Let's end the scene almost before it begins. In other words, he comes in, what I want to avoid, remember I said I'd go into the psyche of the director in terms of what the director is doing. That can only help you as the actor. What the director is trying to do here, this director, is avoid, which I loathe, people coming on stage and presenting themselves for a scene. It should be, he happens to come in here and then he's ready to leave and go off to another place. So he comes in, he's followed by him, he stops, it's like, but you'll not hear me, and then he goes to him and he says to him, it's over. If ever I get dream of such a matter, outlaw me. In other words, that you could even think, I can do it. So he's turning it around. The outrage is now becoming like his part, okay? Remember, this guy is a brilliant psychologist. He knows, how to handle these things. And he starts to leave. Just from where they came in. He turns around, he looks at him, and does that line to him, and then he goes to leave. And now Rodrigo is going to have to respond to that with his next line.
It's almost like it's exasperating. You're not listening to me, so he does, yeah. There's a manipulation, which is great.
And he leaves him there. He's going after him. He follows him in, and now he's leaving. Now what is he going to do? Yeah. So it's going to color the next line. Yeah. See how it colors it. Okay, I want you to have the visual of that. So it's going to determine that line. And remember, he needs Iago. I don't mean just for the courting of her, but this is something for him. This is the only one who protects him, who takes care of him. And by the way, that thou, Iago, who has hacked my curses at the strings were thine, those two lines we can't get. So there's no break. Yeah, you'll have to practice. Yeah, it's as simple as that. You get used to it. It's not easy. It's not easy. The idea is a lot easier than the execution. Of course, the emotion will help, the urgency, but it does have to be clear. Make it a little more sharper on the Rodrigo's line. He says, "Tush, never tell me. I don't want to hear it. I don't believe you. End of conversation." And because he's been trying to tell him, and then he says, and mind you, I say, and then he says, he makes a point up to why he doesn't believe. In other words, so the line would be prefaced to "Tush, never tell me" with something like, "Oh, come on." I don't want to get too contemporary, but we're not going to create poetry on the prefaces, but we should create character. And he would talk like that, like, "Oh, come on, please." And then, "Tush, never tell me." And then a moment, a second, just a beat, and then I take it much unkindly. It's purposeful, it's pointed, it's clear. So slow down a bit there. Don't lose the urgency, but have the urgency come out through the deliberateness of the delivery. Iago, break up more those two lines.
I just don't see him leaving on that line. Okay.
He doesn't have to leave.
He doesn't have to. Well, I mean, even doing the pre-class stuff, I haven't.
No, here's the thing, though. He's not going to leave.
Right, but it's got to make him think that there's at least a chance of him going, fuck it, I've had it, I'm out of here, bye.
Exactly.
I know that's true.
There's a moment. It's another color. Got to be another color. So, he hasn't let him get a word in edgewise, in terms of, he's told him the fact of it, but he hasn't told him why. He hasn't had a chance to explain why. So now, okay, you're going to tell him, in spite of him. Despise me if I do not. There would be a reaction. Let Iago stop. In other words, he's going to continue talking. He's going to give you all that you've heard for the last few minutes. Stop. Okay. It can be physical, some kind of a stoppage, and then go, and now let me tell you.
Let Rodrigo stop.
He'll try to cut in. And what you can do is imagine you might go over to him. In other words, you are determined now to say what's right. And it's not just because of what we said in his last few lines, but it's all moments before. Exactly. You got it exactly. And so, tries to interrupt again. He tries to keep talking, Rodrigo. He tries to argue with you. He tries to accuse you, etc., etc. So, now you're going to stop him, and you're going to tell him what happened. And obviously, if that's the case, it's going to have to be very clear. Okay? But first, you've got to control the moment. Yes. You've got to grab his attention, shut him up without saying shut up, and yet you do. You preface that with, enough, be quiet, let me tell you what's going on. Because he doesn't know about it. More determined are despise me if I do not. Make that sharp. Okay? There's got to be a good, strong prelude to what's coming. And you're going to have to earn his silence and his listening. Again, I say this over and over, you'll hear this, I'll repeat it 300 times before we're through. Not today, but now, as far as parenthetical goes, and by the faith of man I know my price, I am worth no worse than less. Okay? That can be apparent. Well, it has that. In other words, it's an added color to what he's saying. Sometimes it can be extraneous, sometimes not. It's certainly revelatory in terms of character, because it tells us that he feels, that he knows what he's worth, and he's worth the lieutenancy. And no ifs, ands, or buts. But it's got to have that color. And we mustn't lose the connection. Personal suit to make me his lieutenant, off captain. That's the end. And then he had, and by the faith of man I know my price, I am worth no worse a place. Now we get back to the main thing, in other words, what he did. And then he says, and in conclusion, none suits my mediators. I would for now underline those three words, because there's certain key things in this speech that are most important in terms of what he's saying and in terms of what Rodrigo learns. For certes, says he. So that's certes. In other words, there would be a substitute word to create that line right. For certes, says he, I have already chosen my officer. There should be a tie in those two lines. From non-suits to I have. They have got to tie together. There can be no break there. Because he's saying, for certainly, says he, I have already chosen. Certainly I've chosen. He wouldn't say, for certainly, says he, I have already chosen my officer. That's an awkward break. Now, sometimes you don't know unless you have the contemporary word to replace it. You know what I'm saying? So, for certainly, says he, I have already chosen my officer. And now it makes sense. And on the next line, and what was he? It's a setup here. It's coming into a highlight. Forsooth, a great arithmetician. That's what he was. That's the point he's making. One of the major points in this whole speech. He's an arithmetician. In other words, he's a tactician. That's the way he operates as an officer. Where Iago is a fighter. He's out in the field, hand-to-hand combat. One thing that's very important is, historically, at this time, bows and arrows were out, and Cassio was in. In other words, his approach, in terms of cannon, in terms of measurements, yes, it came in about 20 years ago. And the play is historical anyway, so in Shakespeare's time, they would understand exactly, an audience, why Cassio would have been given the lieutenancy. One of the reasons. Because for that very reason, he's not lying, Iago, he's just interpreting it another way. His response to it is different. But what he says is true. He is an arithmetician, and this is exactly what Othello needs. That next line, after, when Michael Cassio, a Florentine, Othello almost damned in a fair wife, these are not major lines within the context of this whole speech. So don't highlight them. I'm not saying to throw them away, but avoid highlighting them. Because if you do, nothing will be important here. Everything will take on importance. There are certain things that are most important, and that is the next slide. And this whole thing is a major error in this speech. That never set a squadron in the field, though the division of a battle knows more than a statesman. Now that all three lines tie together. That never set a squadron in the field, nor the division of a battle knows more than a statesman. And then, there's a slight break, unless, and he's being almost very sarcastic. Okay, they speculate about that, No, it's important because he makes it the line, and it's got to have a reference to him, otherwise it won't mean a thing. Okay.
It could also be that, I don't know.
Go ahead.
That he...
It was thought then, and it's still thought today, that if a man has an attractive woman, either as a wife or as a girlfriend, it's trouble. Because there's going to be guys pursuing her and this and that. So when he says almost damned in a fair wife, it means that he's almost married. He's always almost on the verge of being married because the women pursue him. And that's not a good thing, because if he is married, he'll be dead. Because they're all attractive, and they're going to make life hell. He meant him to be married at the beginning of the play. He forgot. He let the line in. You think funny. It is funny. This is what they believe. Coleridge, Johnson, this is what they wondered about. And that's the way they interpreted it. He just forgot. He never went back and changed it. Right? We go twice to cut in there. Despise me if I do not. Obviously, it will become a lie if he gives you the time. But let the choice be that it will be delayed even if he gave you the time. In other words, he says, despise me if I do not. And instead of, oh, come on, which is the right idea, having the same intent but another way, rather than that, despise me if I do not, and then. Now that will give him at least a second or two
okay.
Usually that will be a better choice in situations like this.
Yes, absolutely.
And don't be afraid to physicalize it. You may don't worry about it. And then it's going to press him.
Yeah.
It's going to press him against the wall where Iago is going to have to do something with that. He's coming in, he's going to cut in, you see his disbelief, his anxiety, etc., and it's going to make Iago say it the right way on that next line. He's got to. In other words, you've got to get his attention. Otherwise, it's just a lot of talk and he's not listening. And this. Now, as we go through this, I'm going to bring in, like you, Monica, so be prepared at any point in the scene to come in right at that. You know what I mean? Okay.
Oh, I totally am.
Don't blur on one Michael Cassio or Florentine fellow spending a fair wife. I don't want it compounded. I don't want it. It's a relative.
I tried one of those classic throw it away lines.
Yeah, well, okay, it's minimal. You've got the right idea, but it can be a little clearer.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure.
And because the next line, that was good. That was a major area, and obviously on each of these major areas, none suits my mediators. That never set a squadron in the particulars that the guy not only is a arithmetician, but he's never been on the field. Set a squadron. Now, again, I would use substitute there, because, other than the devil, because he's not the devil anyway, although he's often interpreted that way. But what I mean is he has foibles, he's vulnerable in his own way. And here's an area. Indulge his feeling.
You mean he gets a little carried away?
Yeah, in a subjective way. He's not helping to achieve his objective by saying to him, unless the book is clear, where the Tolkien Council is going to propose his masterpiece. He's kind of compounding his point, but the point doesn't need compound. Gets caught up in the thing, not just because he's the good actor, which he is, there's no question he's a brilliant actor, but also where it really is that way with him, where he really does get subjective. Because the scene, the way it's normally done, almost, it's not over yet, I don't know if it's being done another way, unfortunately, is where it's a given. He comes in, he's controlled, he knows what he's going to do, he knows how he's going to do it, and he does it. Yeah. And this pretty much is a pattern throughout the whole show. And this is what we must avoid. We want spontaneity, which is the key to his character, spontaneity. That's what he works off it. He thrives on it. He's no good if he works the whole plan out concretely. You'll see throughout the show, as he gets ideas, they come to him from things that happen. And the horror is they brutalize his character. It's hammed, it's played to the utmost in terms of all the fun with all these lines and everything, rather than the fact that this is a man who has great passions. And he has to have conviction, as much conviction as Othello has. You see, but it's not done. It becomes melodrama. In other words, he plays on Othello and he has fun with him and he toys with him and the audience is laughing and they love it and etc., etc. So what? This is nothing. He has his own problems and he really doesn't. They go very deep. And he's even more jealous than Othello is in terms of the character. I said before, Iago tends to steal the show almost invariably. Can you imagine if you play it the way I'm talking? Boy, is he going to steal the show. However, Othello has to match all this, and then some. So you see the work he has. That'll also tie together. Mere prattle without practice is all. Some of it is very obvious, but I want to make sure it's not. So there's those two lines tie together. The next line, he says, "But he, sir, had the election, and I, whom his eyes had seen prove," and then he goes into the particulars of it. Antithesis. Okay? He, I. It's basic, but it doesn't mean you always have to highlight the antithesis. But I want you to be aware. And then you see, often there is a break within it, but it's still all of a piece. Of whom his eyes had seen the proof. At Rhodes, at Cyprus, and on other grounds, Christian and heathen, end of Paris. Must be believed and calm. So what he's saying is, and I must be believed and calm by debitor and creditor. What he's really, but that line, of whom his eyes had seen the proof, and there's just a breath there, at Rhodes, at Cyprus, and on other grounds, Christian and heathen. It's a very important area. Again, this is a very emotional area. And it could be the director just might have you there, or you might discover there that in that area, he directs that to Othello. Now, we don't know that. We don't know that Othello lives downright a mile or so away. We don't know that Brabantio lives down here. We will find out in the course of the scene, particularly when we try to awaken Brabantio. However, you know, okay? And so, use that. Very important, whenever you can, to use physical things that are off stage, and it's something to play with. There he is. He's down there. And again, it's an indulgence. It's an emotional thing here. Of whom his eyes had seen the proof in Rhodes, Cyprus, and the hand-to-hand combat, the killing, how many times he saved his life, etc., etc. So, and this is true. He's not lying. Why did they marry now? Now, he's been going with her. What a term to use. He's been going with her. He's been courting for, say, 7 months. Well, let's say he was invited to the house. He's been in Venice without fighting for 9 months, which is the only time in his life back to all this, because, you're going to find all these things relate to what's happening, things that happen in the play. But anyway, so he meets her about 8 months ago through Brabantio, who invites him to his house. Another question, I'm filled with questions. And there's another one is, why does Brabantio invite him to the house in the first place? With what we know now, it doesn't seem very logical.
Right.
What's so cyclical and confusing?
But it won't be though. It's all going to tie. You're going to see how they'll go around, and all the dots are going to connect. They must connect. Because if there's any openings there, the whole thing will fall.
I've been brainstorming.
Yeah, that's okay. But so it's eight months. Hire mercenaries from all over, which is also very important. Because the government then of that time was controlled by the Venetians, the elite, and he's among them. But and they all intermarried, so they're all related. The Duke, the senators, Brabantio, Desdemona, they're all related. They're second, third, fourth cousins. This is very important because he knew this Shakespeare. I'm not going to go too far into the history here because there are things Shakespeare he got wrong. So we'll ignore those things. What do we care? We'll get it right and for our own purposes so we can justify everything and rationalize everything and make it all real and work for us. So he invites him because of the prestige and my God, he's a hero and he's not fighting. He has time, Othello, to kill. God knows how many months, you know. And then she sees him, and because she is attracted to him. He's unusual. He's an attractive man in his way, and he's different. He's an anomaly. She's never seen anyone like him. And he's a very gentle person, which is interesting. The contrast between the gentle and the masculine, very unusual. And we know that she, as you all said, is great. She is so independent, so obviously independent. It's just there's an irony here. She's very independent, and she's so modern in her way, in terms of today, God knows. But there's a tragedy here, too, growing, and that is that she, in terms of environment, vis-a-vis her environment, is totally unprepared to take this independence and act on it. She doesn't know about it. She is used to getting her way. Another question has to be asked. Has she ever not gotten her way? I'm not making her out to be a spoiled bride. I'm just asking her, has she ever not? Because when her father wants a daughter to marry in Venetian society, she'll bring A, B, and C. You know, take your choice. That's it. Don't give me, you don't want any of them. You know, there's three nice guys there. Pick one, and, you know, or pick out of 4 or 5, but that's it. Not with her. No, with her. She's got it, you know, very independent. But this independence is also very dangerous. An irony. An environment is going to help to kill her. It's going to help to kill her because she quiet her as the play goes on until she seems to become a sacrificial lamb. We have to ask why. Because she's out of her element. She's out of her element literally on Cyprus, on the island there, because it's an island of warfare, and this is something. She's never traveled. Ask that. Has she ever left Venice? Now maybe she has, but maybe she hasn't. And if the choices are equal, because I know you asked about this before, Mark, about an area where it could go the other way and it's just as logical. And I was saying, yes, but if you have 2 choices in a play, or even 3, and they're all valid, they're all logical, you can work with any of the 3 and it makes perfect sense. But one of them is the most exciting choice, always pick that one. Always. You know, but I'm saying where they're all I don't mean where one is, you know, down here and you're picking it because it's colorful. You'll regret it. Because later on it's going to screw you up in terms of other things. But anyway, we're back to her again. She doesn't know what to do as this play progresses. And when he is inflamed in the last quarter of the play, she's lost. And she becomes totally submissive to him. It's like, I'll be so good. I'll do everything the way he wants. And it is loathsome. It is loathsome. And she just gives herself to him like a sacrificial lamb. I don't mean that she doesn't fight like hell in that last scene. There's no way that my Desdemona is just going to die right there. Oh no. There's got to be a fight for her life. There's different ways to do it, of course. But what I'm saying is, perhaps at the end of the play, one of the things that can come out of this, perhaps, in terms of the theme that we're talking about, is a woman watching the play whose environment in some ways has been the same. And to a certain extent it is. I don't care how free women are today. They're freer in this country than they are anywhere in the world. That's a very provincial view we have. Because a lot of the critics in this country, when they talk about this play, they attack the idea of women's rights in terms of this play or their freedom. Because after all, they say, take a look in the United States. There's more freedom here than anywhere. This is true in terms of women. Oh, they still have a long way to go in spite of the cigarette commercial. It might come a long way. They got a long way to go. But my point is, it's provincial to look at it just in terms of the United States. What we have to do, and I don't want to get too much into this, but it is important, in terms of India. We know what happens to the female, to the babies in India, in terms of China. And how about Africa? Oh, Africa is a great one, where there's so much money problem, and the women, the clitorectomy and all this other bullshit, I mean, come on, it's unbelievable. So if you look at the whole world, you realize the United States, in terms of population, is a very small part of this 3 billion, so to say that things are better here and they still have a ways to go, true. But in terms of the world, they're so far behind, it's unbelievable. So the play is very applicable in
in terms of what's happening. And perhaps at the end, the woman, certain people will say, they'll look and they'll say, never will I give my life to another human being, you know, the way she does. Okay, I understand what you're saying. Now, let me ask you something. As the actress, you can go with that. Makes sense. There's nothing wrong with that. But let's take another choice. Let's say that that's not the reason. That's part of it. But let's say the overriding reason is that she is self-willed. Now, we know she is self-willed, in fact, by what she does at the beginning of the play. So, now, I'm not saying this is bad to be self-willed, but it depends on what the circumstances are. But I mean where it's a driving force in her. Self-willed. She's going to have her way. She's hard won, but once she's won over to something, in other words, Othello had problems in the courtship. I know he goes into this great speech. I think it's a very good speech, in spite of what people see. In spite of what, they pontificate, they expostulate, they do points. It's noble, and it's this, and it's that. Yeah, whatever. It doesn't mean anything. But the thing I'm driving at is if she is so self-willed, she always gets her way. We were talking about that before. You have to ask, has she ever not gotten her way? Now, maybe she has. Maybe at some point in her life she didn't. I don't know. If she's had her way with marriage, I mean, where she hasn't married any of the guys that you wanted her to, which is that's unheard of, as I said before. Well, I'm led to believe she always gets her way. So she's very spoiled. And a great woman. I have to like her very much in a lot of ways. But, you know, let's find the humanity in her. Let's find the weaknesses in her. Self-willed. And she's had, Othello, I digress, has had problems in courting her. Because there's a line she has, which is very interesting. Later on, when she tries to win him over in that first scene at Cyprus, not at the arrival scene, the one after, when she tries to convince him to rehire Cassio. And she mentions things. She says, Cassio, who you've known for years, who you fought with, who was your friend, who was this, who was that, and he who came to court me, who helped you to court me, and when you were, and when I wasn't speaking to you, when I was so angry with you, he would placate, he would even, yeah. So there were problems in this courtship. But finally, he won her over. This bullshit, this speech he has about, you know, well, it's not bullshit, it's a real character speech, because he tells us in that speech about himself. And it's very interesting, that speech. She loved me for the battles that I had endured, all the heartache and the horror, and I loved her because of that. I loved her because she pitied me. Whoopee. If you think of what is being said here, it's like mind-boggling. You know, and yet the speech is treated in terms of the critics as something beautiful and magnificent. Well, it is beautiful. It's character revelatory. That's what it is beautiful. It's great. But again, getting back, so there's been problems in the relationship at the beginning. But finally, he won her over. This is what I'm driving at. Once a woman like Desdemona is won over, that self-willed quality now has gotten this thing called her lover, and nothing is going to undo it. Because she refuses to see the reality of it. Now, I know he didn't do any of these things before she went to the island. I grant this, you're absolutely right. But things change. Life changes. Reality isn't what you thought it was. Relationships change because people aren't what they appeared to be. I don't know that people really change. What they change is what they show you. It's not what it really was. It was all an act. Maybe they didn't know it. Maybe they were, you know, they didn't know it themselves. And I don't think he did, Othello, except subconsciously. But nevertheless, we have to deal with reality now. She makes no adjustment. Now, if you make the choice, this is what I'm saying, what you said is fine, but let's say you make the other choice where she is totally self-willed, and that self-will is what motivates her not to give up on him. Now, you've got something to work with as the actress. I think that'll be stronger for you and something you can really grab a hold of. So it's more positive. Even though it's a negative thing she's doing, it's a more positive way to approach it. Partly that, and also that she won't admit that she's wrong. She's got, in other words, Othello has got to be what I thought he was. Now, this may sound a little far out. People don't do this. All people do it all the time. You know, I refuse to. He's got to be what I want him to be. Now, he does the same thing. He does the same thing with her, in fact. She's got to be, except the result is much different where he's coming from. Whoopee. I mean, she's got to be what I want her to be. There's nothing to indicate she isn't. You know, with him there is. The culture that we're dealing with, Cassio exemplifies, is the whore Or is the goddess? I think the whore, the wrong person down here. The whore or the goddess, right? Yeah. It's that mentality. And Cassio, he's perfect. Because here's Cassio, who thinks Desdemona, he goes into this whole speech at Cyprus, prior to her arrival. The rocks, the wind, everything, the waves, they part. It's Mrs. Moses is coming, and she's going to do, it's amazing, all this, and then when she does arrive, oh my God, he's on his knees, he's this, he's that, and then he describes her in the battlement scene when he tries to get raunchy Iago, and Cassio will have none of it. She's a goddess. Very nice, very interesting. Yeah, How does he treat Bianca?
Right.
And it's interesting. Bianca is supposed to be a whore and prostitute. According to who? According to Iago. He calls her that. Well, that's got to be. And according to a male critic who reads the play, I guess that's the case. We don't give her any acknowledgement at all. I find her to be a very decent human being. And it's interesting, too, with her jealousy, and she is jealous, she comes out with it. She's healthy. There's no mention of that. It's a wonderful thing. That scene she has with Cassio, when you son of a bitch, you're going to come to dinner, like, over my dead body, you're coming to dinner, and she throws the thing down. That's good. That's good. It's real Italian, by the way. It's good. Which is another thing, by the way, not to lose track of, the thing about the Italian thing. Because the Italians are touchy. They're Latin, which I think is wonderful. And since we have a Latin playwright, we agreed on that earlier, right? That he's Latin, okay? So, what I'm driving at is, and it's got to be in the play in terms of handling people, because there's a big difference between the way the Latins, especially the Italians, handle men, women. I'm not just talking about the opposite sex. I mean, with men, it's touching, which is wonderful, I think. I mean, it's wonderful in life, God. And the English don't do that. Or the Swiss, or the Germans, I'm sorry, use your fingers. But the Italians, so it's important too to be aware of that, and it's going to temper how we work on stage. It's going to temper Iago and Othello, or temper, no, not temper, it's going to highlight, it's going to compound it, it'll be a hypertrophy, because you've got Iago and Othello, you have opportunities for contact, at least from Iago. Othello maybe not so much, but Iago, he can use that, and it is his Italian nature. He may be a son of a bitch Italian, but he's still Italian, and the hands and the this and the that, so you can feel free to indulge in that.
Olivier interpreted him as a homo, didn't he?
Iago.
That was his explanation of Iago's weirdness, that he's actually a homo.
Well, it was Jones, Jones who had the idea on Hamlet, the Oedipus thing. He was the one who popularized that.
Oh, yeah.
And he did the movie that way. Well, he got the same idea for Iago. That was early. We did it in 38.
Oh,
38 with
Olivier thought it was a huge revelation.
Yeah, but he changed his mind later on. Before he died, there was an interview with him. Rosenberg, who wrote The Masks of Othello, he had interviewed him, and he mentioned that this was many years after, this was 58 or so, that when he looked back on it, he said it was a good idea. That he loved stuff like that, but he was, I never saw Iago, it was way before my time. But his Othello, I saw his Othello, and quite frankly, it's something, if you haven't seen his Othello, now not the rest of the cast. The rest of the cast was not there, unfortunately. They just were not there at all. But his Othello was the only Othello I've ever seen. I'm not saying came close. He's an excellent Othello. It's one of the best things he ever did. He's the only one who did the role. And he just came on like a lion. And you can forget all other performances. I've never seen the role done well. Not even close. Not even where they could touch it until I saw him do it.
So that's what I thought. I just thought it was, James Earl Jones hated it. He thought, he just doesn't think Othello's a savage. And, Olivier does it as a savage. The Moors are like...
Well, the only problem with this is just something I only bring this up not to get into a story here, but to learn from, is he had an Iago who was very weak in the movie and in the plays.
He might have picked him himself,
Excuse me?
He might have chosen that.
Well, that's what I'm driving at. Frank Finlay played the role, and he was very weak, and he wasn't there at all. And so it was his thing from beginning to end. The thing is, he was wonderful once Olivier, but he could have been even better by maybe 10% if he had a really strong Iago. Iago was not very set. He didn't. He didn't because we're all human. Let's face it, we're all human, and you're doing a role like that or any good role, and then you got another role, and you know it's a stealer. Because almost every time the play is done, Iago walks off with the reviews. There's that story of the actor, I think it was Garrett, who did Othello. He also had done Iago, but anyway, he did the part of Othello, and he did it. And he went out of town, he did it, and the reviews came in, and Iago stole the show, and Iago stole the show, and he tried everything to get, the show to himself. And no matter what he did, he couldn't. Finally, he found the answer. One day he did Iago, and he got all the reviews. And it's true, the story. It's not
Does Iago have more lines?
Yeah, Iago has. The thing is, though, the truth is, if Othello is done to the full maximum in terms of potential, and Iago is done the same way, Othello is going to dominate. It doesn't happen. It only happened in that film, and it happened partly because Iago was weak, as I say. But never, ever try to fight that. Because we all have it in us, but try to, as artists, try to fight that, and you'll be better for it, having stronger people. If you ever have such a say, where you can determine such a thing, it can only make you better. But anyway, in terms of Desdemona, absolutely, she at the end of the story, it should be like, this will never happen to me. Never will I allow this to happen. It's got to, that should be part of it. And ask yourself, what would happen if Desdemona was culpable? This is rarely brought up. What would happen, let's say she's guilty, that she had this affair with Cassio, for whatever reason, it could be any number of reasons. So, does this in any way, so the fact is, if it was, there'd be no problem in the play, as far as most of the critics are concerned. Well, he was right, he killed her. And what is his plan at the end? I mean, he thinks she's guilty, he's convinced that she's guilty. But what does he intend to do after he kills her? And there's got to be something in his head. Maybe not a great plan, but some idea, some kind of a thing. And we have to ask that. And we also have to ask, how would the Venetian state respond to it if Emilia does not say anything? And you've got Iago's word and you've got Othello's word against Desdemona. Right. What happens in the play now? Am I to believe that he's going to be executed or whatever? Or am I to believe he's going to be free because of what? Oh, there was some. I seriously wonder how many married men, married 4 years, would have the strength to walk away without inflicting some corporal punishment. This was Judge Robert Cahill explaining why he sentenced Kenneth Peacock, who killed his wife, after finding her in bed with another man, to only 18 months in jail. It's just interesting. I mean, you can dig these things up every day. I had a whole bunch of these. I couldn't find them then, but I was accumulating over the last year. But it's interesting, though, isn't it? So now understand what I'm saying. I'm not trying to make this play. I'm not trying to contemporize Shakespeare. That's bullshit. I won't do that. But what we have to do is learn about the present from Shakespeare. Not go and take the present and glue it onto Shakespeare. There's a big difference between the two. If we're coming from this and we're saying, okay, now I'm going to view Shakespeare, we're going to do it from this, no. We've gone through our experiences, but now what does he tell us about creative artists? But we'll do it different ways each time, but with the same idea behind it. We're not going to change the intent of the scene or the objectives, but we'll try a few different things. Just for an example, we might have Iago when he comes in at the beginning, where he comes in first, and Rodrigo comes in after him and is going after him and bawling him out for what was happening. On the other hand, the next time we do it, I might have Rodrigo come in first and Iago pursuing him. The idea is the same, but it changes things, obviously, and we'll be doing things like that. But don't worry about the blocking. Now, as we do it, we'll start with 2 people, and then you'll be watching, and then you'll do it. You'll learn more about the scene as you're watching it. So we'll it's like a relay race where we'll be growing on it each time. But we'll grow together. We're not competing. We're not out to prove anything here. We're just trying to get a better understanding. Now, a lot of your focus will be on Othello, Mark, obviously, because I don't want the women reading that role. That won't work for me. In terms of it'll be counterproductive. You'll do other things, because there's other scenes that he's not in, of course. But when we're doing his scenes, you'll focus on him. So you will be able to really zero in on that character more than you would any other. And that's good. You must understand, this is one of the toughest shows in all of the Shakespearean plays. Believe me, I know. The only show that's tougher than this, I'm not talking about all, I'm talking about great plays, like King John and the others. Lear, of course, is at the top of any list. But after Lear, it's this play, because the dialogue is convoluted. I don't mean that in a bad way, but it is. There's ways, especially Iago, of expressing things So it starts with R and it goes to Z and then back to A. And so be prepared for that. It's going to be a real challenge. This is not just another Shakespearean play. There's a lot of talk. Granville Barker and others have said that when you do the Shakespearean plays, don't give me from what happened to Hamlet from the time he left this area to get to his mother's room and he came across Claudius praying. Don't worry about what happened in between. Don't worry about the time element. Don't worry about that. It doesn't exist. All that exists on stage when you're doing Shakespeare is what you do. Well, I don't work that way. I could never work that way. And to me, that's garbage. I'm sorry. And he's not the only one who feels that way. Now, taking that idea in mind, we come to the opening of this play. Can somebody, in God's name, please tell me how to explain the opening scene in terms of what's going on, in terms of the things they say? I mean, in terms of the background, and in terms of scene 2. There's a lot of questions arising. I can take those two scenes apart and destroy them. In terms of any logic, it doesn't make any sense. I mean, where is he coming from, Iago? First of all, why are they here? I'll ask some questions now, but you ask too, please. Why are they here? They're near the Grand Canal, okay? They are near the area where the grandees live, the upper echelon. That's of course Brabantio and the Duke and the others, okay? So we know we're in the elite neighborhood. We also find out in the course of the scene that Brabantio's home is like right just about where we are. It's a few yards away because momentarily they'll be yelling at him or whatever. So we're right near his house, okay? And how did we get here? We do know that he's just told Rodrigo that they got married. And the first line Rodrigo has, apparently got a couple of other lines. Maybe he told him a minute ago. It's very important how long ago, but it's new, it's in the air, it's cracking. He just told him, and now we have his reaction, Rodrigo. How could you know this? And how could you not have known this earlier? Et cetera, et cetera. Well, when did they get married? Are they married now? Are they in fact married? And when Iago goes into scene 2, he's on with Othello, and he's talking about what happened, that someone, it's never really clear exactly who it was, who said terrible things about Othello. Is it Brabantio who said these things, or is it Rodrigo who said these things? You see? And okay, let's put some pieces together. 9 months, okay, 8 months he's been courting her. There's the mark. Now we have to ask one big question here. It's in terms of any show. It's a thing a writer always should ask. Why does the play open when it does? That's such an important question. Why does Othello open now? Why doesn't it open? Why did it open yesterday, or a week ago, or tomorrow? Why does it open now? There's got to be a reason. This is a propitious moment in time. Okay. What has happened? Number 1, just before the opening of the play, Desdemona and Othello have gotten married. And I say just before, I mean they're getting married now, as this is happening.
I think that's the juiciest choice. If they're getting married as the scene is happening and they haven't consummated it by the time Othello goes off to war.
Oh, they have. It isn't consummated. Yeah. It could be a choice, but you could say it was, although he says Othello, just before the battlement scene, he says that now we're going to go off, after he puts Cassio in charge, now we're going to go off and I'm going to reap the rewards that I have not yet. Rather he's talking in terms of, they're going to make love, which they haven't done before. So it's very important. Shakespeare puts that in, though. It's not really arbitrary. And then we have to ask, why does it? The other thing is, Iago has just found out about the marriage. We will get into why. He just found out. So what you've got is this. You've got the situation where Othello has planned to have her taken from Brabantio's, and Gondolier will bring her to the Sagittarium. That's where he's staying. No one knows he's staying at the Sagittarium, but someone does know. Cassio knows. Even though Cassio comes in the next... See, this is where I say it's so convoluted, all this. We've got to answer a lot of questions, and if we do, it'll all make sense. Cassio comes in the next scene, and he finds out from Iago that Othello was married. And he says, really? He didn't know anything about it. And he said, who did she marry? It's all bullshit. He has to know. He was the one who was his go-between in the courtship. How could he not know? So it's all an act. Now that's going to give Cassio a lot to work with. When Cassio comes in that scene with when he comes to tell him that he wants it. You got a whole scene going between Cassio and Othello, and then Cassio and Iago. Iago thinks that he doesn't know, so he's playing a game with him like, I know and you don't. And Cassio's thinking, he knows exactly what's happening. And I can prove it. If he didn't know, first of all, he should know anyway, because he's been the go-between, but also, how did he know he's at the Sagittarius? He doesn't stay at the Sagittarius. This is not a place he comes to. They've been looking for him. In scene 2, they've sent out 3 parties to search for him, for Othello, because, and that's another thing that happens just before the play opens, the war, the Turks, word has just arrived before the play opens that the Turks are sending a large fleet of maybe 200 ships to Cyprus. Just arrived, the word. And another thing that's just happened before the play opened is that because of that, the Senate and the Duke have called a special council, a war council. And the third thing that's happened just before, this is all within a few hours of the opening of the play, is that they have sent 3 separate parties out to find Othello. Okay? None of which will find him. The only party that's going to find Othello is he knows he's married. Oh, he knows he's married. He and Cassio know. No one else knows. Bring Brabantio's party, search party, to the Sagittarius. Exactly. No, I mean, of course, Iago. Yeah, Iago, of course, knows. And so they called a war council. Just before they send out several parties to find him, she's just left the house with the gondolier or whatever, and she's heading toward the Sagittarius. All this just before the play opens. Another thing that happens before the play opens, just before the play opens that night, Brabantio has a dream. It's not a big deal, but it's important. He has a dream that Othello has gone off. They've been, and it's going to color because the urgency, but a certain kind of urgency, or whatever. It's going to give a certain urgency and immediacy to everything that happens, because time is very important. He wants to do everything he can, Iago, to hurt the marriage. He says in the scene he can't stop the marriage because apparently he says they need him. They have no one of his equal to fight the wars in Cyprus. He is, he's a great general, obviously, they all say it, so that's agreed upon, and they do need him. So, it's going to color everything in the scene, and the next scene. Something else that's happened, that happened a few days ago, but it's just prior to the opening. Cassio has just been made Othello's lieutenant. Say like 3 days ago. That's very important. Very important for Iago, of course. In other words, it's fresh. And Iago has had 3 days to stew over it. Not 1 day, not a few hours, because you see, if it's a few hours, it's not enough time. He's had 3 or 4 days, we'll say, to stew about it, to think about it, that son of a bitch. And also, Iago has just found out. Let's say that Othello, this same night, has sent for Iago. He left a message at his place to come to the Sagittarius. I'm not saying anything to anyone. He arrives at the Sagittarius, this is earlier in the evening, and he tells him that right now, Iago, she is being taken away from her house and she's being brought here. I want you to know, because he's his number 1 man, outside of his lieutenant, of course, he's his number 2 man. And he wants him to know so he'll be prepared for the fallout. Okay? And he tells him to report back the next morning. That's the last thing he tells him. Now Iago leaves. So he's just found out. That plus the thing about the lieutenant thing is going to really exacerbate the whole condition for Iago. So he's got, son of a bitch. One thing very important, Iago knows nothing about Cassio's involvement in this. This is very important. Why is it important? Because in the temptation scene, just prior to the temptation scene, when Desdemona and Othello are together and she tries to charm him to hire Cassio back, she mentions that Othello, I mentioned this before, the line where, Cassio, who was such a good friend of yours, who came between us so many times when I was so disgusted with you. Now there's discovery. That's going to have a D. You know when we get to that scene, that's going to have a D, because Iago didn't know this. Now we could say Iago did know. It's possible. It's not logical, but well, it's possible. Well then, what does it mean? But if Iago is standing there, he hears this conversation. All this time, Cassio was involved in the courtship, and I never knew. Which, by the way, will exacerbate his loathing of Othello right before the temptation scene.
Yeah.
Now, the temptation scene is one of the greatest scenes in all of Shakespeare. It may be the greatest. Probably is. Probably is. It's like Dostoevsky's, the Grand Inquisitor. That's the only analogy I can draw in The Brothers Karamazov. It's the exact analogy, except it's better. Maybe only because of Shakespeare, because they're both great scenes. But it's that. But what I'm saying is, why go into the temptation scene having all the ammunition already and not have something new just before we started? And also, he can use it beautifully, not just in terms of his loathing and hate, but also it's something that he can feign ignorance of it. Well, he didn't know about it, he just found out. So he can ask it as a question. Did he, go between? And it's like a discovery for Iago. And so right at the beginning of the temptation scene, we're going to have an Iago who is like very fearful, very puzzled, very concerned. Being the great actor he is, it's all going to work. And you've got a new given circumstance that he can work with and take with him, a fresh one. And so, Iago, he's just found out, he tells him to meet him in the morning. Iago, now what is Iago going to do? He's going to lose his goal. He's $8,000, and he wants to get a few thousand more before this guy goes broke. And there's always his property. If he sells the property, that's good for another 10 or 15,000. That'll keep him good. That's a lot of money. He doesn't say how much money, but obviously he spent a lot, Rodrigo. The reason I say that is because at the end of the last scene before he goes to Cyprus, he doesn't have much money left. He only has his property left. Because he says, I'll sell all my land. Why is he selling all his land? He has money. His parents left him money, obviously they're dead, and he spent a lot of it, and now he spent a lot more through Iago. And now he's down to his land. And that's the last thing he sells. And he says on Cyprus, in that scene, the battlement scene, I've spent all my money. He has nothing left. So he's got to tell Rodrigo what has happened. He doesn't want someone else to tell him. Now none of this is in the show. Shakespeare doesn't tell us anything. Not really. Oh, you can find clues. I'm giving you clues between the lines and little things here and there. But overall, it's our job. And I just love these critics or these directors who say, well, it's not the actor's job to do anything. It's the writer. Whatever the writer gives you, that's all you have to work with. And you can't presume you can't create the life of the character beyond what, because the writer created it. Well, yeah, the writer created it. But if that's the case, then what the hell does the actor do? Is this creative, what we do? What are we, a bunch of puppets? We can bring things to the characters that, believe me, I don't care who the writer is, can only say, God, I didn't know that. Or, I knew it subliminally, but I didn't know it consciously. A great writer writes subconsciously a lot of it. Poe, others, and then he'll look at the playwright and he'll say, yeah, that is what I wanted. I just didn't know it consciously. There's nothing wrong with it. They're not taking anything away from Shakespeare or anyone else. But it is taking away from us. If we're left with the crumbs, these facts, we've got to fill in all these things. And then we've got a creation that's ours. Otherwise, he was given to go and court Desdemona. He said to him, like he's doing what Cassio does for Othello. The only thing is, he's not courting her. He isn't a singer. He knows her distantly. He hardly knows her at all. He takes the money and uses it. He spent it. He spent a lot of it already. You got to remember that Iago doesn't make much money, and he hasn't worked in 9 months. 9 months. These guys, there's no pension for a soldier's life is a miserable thing, and it really was. There's no pension. There's no retirement. He's 28 years old. 28 is not young in that day and age. I want you to think in terms of contemporary when we say age. It doesn't make any sense. A guy at 28 then is like 43 or 44 today, at least. And a worn 44 because he's a soldier, so he's bad hand-to-hand combat or whatever. We've got to think in those terms. Otherwise, we won't understand what's going on here. Iago isn't. That's why actors playing Iago who are 28 rarely work, because you need an older actor to do it right. And it makes sense if we think in terms of how old they really were. These guys looked older. They didn't look 28. Can you imagine a guy who's been a warrior since he's maybe 12 years old? He's fought hand-to-hand combat in Rhodes and in Cyprus. They mentioned right on the line, he and Othello fighting, killing, whatever. Do you know what this guy's going to look like at the age of 28? He's got a limp. He's got wounds. We're dealing with reality. He doesn't come on bouncing across the stage, And Othello, too, is going to have a lot of wear and tear, But it's something to be aware of. And so as I say, they're not just older, they're going to look older. They really are. It seems like, how convenient. They're out in the street having this big fight. Finally, he wins him over, he placates him, and he gets this great idea. I got an idea. Let's wake up Ravancho, who just happens to be right over there. Well, of course, that's ridiculous. There's got to be a reason why they're here. Now, if Rodrigo was so infuriated with Iago, how would he have allowed him to bring him here? It doesn't make any sense. Well, it can make sense. There's several things you can do here to expand on this or whatever, but the thing, he goes to Rodrigo and he tells him, look, I got to talk to you. It's very important. Well, what do you want? Just come along. Gondola. They just happen to go to this area where Ravancho lives. He knows the area, but he doesn't know why they're here. And when they get off the gondola and they're heading up to the area where we see them come in, that's when he tells them. That makes sense. I mean, you can work with that. And it should work well. It shouldn't be, you don't have to stretch anything. That makes perfect sense. Now he tells them. He's got them all set and primed. Now he tells them, my God, he's furious. Okay, so that brings us into the opening, as far as the two of them are concerned. Another thing that's happened just before the play opens. Iago has decided to seek revenge on Othello. That's important. It may sound very basic and trite because it's obvious, but not so. Because we have to ask another question here. Has Iago ever done this before? Has he ever seek revenge on Othello? He's going after a general who's a very important man in the Venetian society. Has he ever done this before? I think the answer is obviously no. Another question comes up. Why is he doing it now? I mean, because he wasn't made lieutenant, which he thought he should, and he wasn't told about the marriage until after the fact. He didn't even confide in him. He'd be furious about that. And he wouldn't confide in him. And he's going to get revenge on him. But he's not going to kill him. He's not going to get into anything that happens in the play later on. That happens as we go along. And there'll be reasons why that happens. But right now, he wants to hurt him any way he can. And the only way he can is to wake up Ravancho, and maybe they can annul the marriage or something. Who knows? He'll create chaos. But it's going to hurt him. He's going to hurt him. So he comes in with the idea, first I'll placate him, and then we'll wake Ravancho up. And that's exactly what happens in the scene. And then we'll have him come to the Sagittarius, which is where they are. Who knows this, of course. And another thing that's happened before the scene opens, Rodrigo has decided once and for all to break with Iago. That's important. He's never decided that before. But let's say that this is the first time. Although, just to show you the possibility, there's infinite possibility. There's another possibility there, and either one. Is you as the artist. The one that works for you is the right one. Don't ever let anybody think different, as long as it's a logical choice. It could be that he has tried to break with him before, and he wasn't able to. That Iago won him over. The reason I say that then is, if the scene, you can do it either way. We'll try it both ways. He comes in, he's tried to break with Iago 3 other times, and Iago won him over each time. Now this is the 4th time. Now he's going to be very fearful when he comes into the scene. He's going to be very concerned. Can I do it? And it's going to add another element in terms of the scene. I can't think of anything else that's any other given circumstances. If you can, add them in. There's a bunch marked in the play in the opening scene, but I don't...
Do you attach any importance to Iago's line that abroad it is thought that Othello has been with his wife?
Yes. Oh, God, yes. And by the way, in terms of that, a lot of the critics say, well, it's a crazy thing, because it's not really important, and it probably isn't true because it's not logical. Emilia, and it is, I think it's obvious in the play that Emilia had nothing to do with Othello. She doesn't like him. She doesn't like him from the last movie because there are things that she says later on. She doesn't really approve of the marriage, but okay, she goes along with it. She can go stop it. But the thing I'm saying, there's an antagonism later in the play that's profound. There's an edge there. And she says about that, her most wicked bargain, or whatever she calls it, that toward the last part of the play. There's an edge there. There's no way this woman had anything to do with him. However, the point is, It doesn't have to be true. And he doesn't have to think it's true.
Right.
Just the idea. Imagine you got a soldier. There's a soldier 24 hours a day. This guy's usually in the field fighting and there are his men. He's like a top sergeant, whatever. And they're thinking to themselves, the rumor is out that his wife is, you know what that does to a guy? Imagine what he doesn't really, maybe he doesn't even care that
That's going
much.
to be another bar in his side.
Oh yeah, so it's very important. Absolutely.
Yeah, because he does say, I don't even know if it's true, but I'm going to act like it is true.
Yes.
Because
And they say that that's not logical, but it is logical. It doesn't matter if it's true.
people think
It's what people think, and what people think is so paramount in this play in terms of appearance. It's something that runs through the whole show. Cassio, Brabantio, who dies of what people think. Othello, who we get back to pride now. It all ties together. Now